This is the fifth and last episode of a series on infrastructures. This is a series of 5 interviews to people based or coming from Ireland, Finland, France, Denmark, and the United States. My main focus is in understanding the possible role of design in infrastructures. I started this enquiry interviewing designers involved in the development of services for other projects or based in other research infrastructures. I wanted to ask them what can we design in relation to the work of infrastructures. In the proposal for the iRisk project, the EU project on climate risks in which I am now working, says that we will co-design services together with stakeholders. We asked partners working with us if they have previous experience in co-designing, and they mentioned that in one specific research project, they have highlighted co-design. This project was eShape, an EU project that concentrates on bringing together Earth observation data to create services for decision makers, citizens, the industry, and the researchers. I started to investigate who were the designers and design researchers involved in eShape, and I got to know about the work of today's guests. She is Raphaelle Barbier, a design researcher based in France. In this interview, we talk about why it is worthy to introduce co-design in the context of the project dealing with Earth observations and how they did it. Raphaelle tells about her doctoral research in which she uses as a case eShape, that project. She brings clear examples and explains how she sees the role of a designer working in big EU projects with multiple research partners and other stakeholders. My name is Mariana Salgado. This is Diseño y Diáspora.
I'm Raphaelle Barbier. I've got an engineering background, and then I did a PhD in the field of design and innovation management at the Center for Management Science at MIN Paris PSL University. And I think today we will talk about the subject of my PhD that I defended last year.
I am very interested in your PhD because at least in one of the cases, you work in a project called eShape, right?
Yes, exactly.
And what was your role in that project?
Yeah, so this project was a big European project funded by the European Commission, and it gathered 68 partners all over Europe to develop 37 pilot applications based on Earth observation data. So data coming from satellites, from meteorological stations, from different types of instruments, giving us information about the Earth, basically. And the goal was to develop these applications in different areas related to agriculture, health, energy, biodiversity, water resources, disaster management.
And this was a how long project?
It was a 4-year project.
Okay. And when you say pilots, do you mean like they were like really applications, or they were prototypes, or which type of results are these pilots?
Yeah, this is actually a good question because the pilots had a quite crucial role in the project. So usually they involved a team of different partners, which could be research labs or meteorological institutes or even commercial companies working in the Earth observation field. And these partners were trying to develop some kind of applications, but that were not necessarily already commercialized or services. So it's a kind of pilot because it's a kind of it's not a first attempt, but it's a development process.
And as part of the eShape, there were a lot of research infrastructures working with you in the environmental research infrastructures, right?
Yeah. So as I said, the profiles of these partners in the project were people who were experts in data, instruments, earth sciences in general. And as I told you, there were some meteorological institutes, research labs, also commercial companies. And some of these partners were also part of research infrastructures. So I think you are involved in ICOS related to the carbon.
Yeah, and ICOS was part of eShape.
Yeah, exactly. And there were also research infrastructures related to biodiversity, Altair, yeah, these kinds of infrastructures.
And what was your role? What were you doing there?
Yeah, so my role, so I was not alone with my research team. So we were a team of 4. Our role was to structure a co-design methodology that would help the project partners to develop the applications based on Earth observation data.
So concretely, what did you do?
Yeah, exactly. And why I'm saying that we needed to structure a methodology is also because we were 68 partners. So our role was definitely not to co-design and to do the co-design process for all 68 partners. We were only a team of 4, so it would have been a bit too complicated, impossible. So the idea was more to build a framework that then could be used by the different partners. And to build this framework, of course, we work closely with the project partners.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's going to be such a lot of pilots that you need to align people in order to be able to compare results.
Yeah, and because I would like to make it maybe a bit clearer for people who might not be familiar with the Earth observation field, maybe I can take an example to explain the issues, why we need co-design to develop some applications based on Earth observation data. So the thing is that historically, we have developed all these scientific instruments to observe the Earth. It might be the atmosphere, it might be the meteorological processes, climate processes, the vegetation and everything. But these data are were mainly used in the scientific community at first. But on the other side, we see that some people who are not necessarily within the scientific community.
So that they are not researchers, policymakers.
Exactly.
Normal citizens that are not part of a research community.
Municipalities or farmers in the agriculture sector or companies working in the renewable energy sectors. So all these different actors might benefit from the data that already exists. But the problem is that the scientific world and the, let's say, users world are not connected. They don't know each other, not very well. They don't share the same knowledge. They might even don't know that they exist, actually. For example, for a municipality or a farmer, maybe it's not self-evident that there are all these data that exist somewhere that could be helpful in a certain way. And on the other way around, for scientists, it's also very difficult to know whether or not this data could be helpful outside the scientific community. Like as a researcher, knowing a lot about meteorology or instruments or satellites, I'm not supposed to know a lot about agriculture or how a municipality works and what are the day-to-day activities of all these actors outside the scientific sphere. So in the thesis, I called this kind of situation a situation of grand distance. So it means that people are very distant from each other. They don't share the same knowledge. They might not know that they exist. They don't know how to speak to each other. They might not have the same interests. They don't have to comply with the same rules or regulations. You have on the one side, for example, rules related to agriculture policies or city planning, whatever. And then on the other side, rules related to instruments or satellites or something. So you really need to find a way of bridging this gap and this very large distance between these two worlds. And this is where co-design comes into play.
Okay. And you have picked to work with co-design, but most of the partners in the projects were not having a background as designers. So you needed to frame what you were going to do, and in order that everybody works in the same manner, right? Or more or less have the same framework.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe I can just expand a bit on the point I made before. So why do we need co-design? As I said, it's because we have this grand distance between very separate worlds. And what is also important to know is that because this is a very difficult case, we might not have off-the-shelf methods that already exist and that maybe consultants could just apply. So that's why we also needed a kind of research process to understand and develop co-design methods that would be adequate to address this grand distance. And what we did in the project was actually not to start directly with the workshops, because we often have in mind that co-design is only a question of organizing workshops to ask users to express their needs. But actually, it's much more than that. Before that, you need to know with whom would I like to co-design, and whom am I supposed to invite to the workshops, and for what purposes. So before this phase of organizing workshops, there was a need of organizing a kind of diagnosis phase to understand what are the co-design needs for the different pilots, and what is the purpose of co-designing.
So you did some kind of a stakeholder analysis.
So yes, on our own, we started with asking a few questions about each pilots, so the status of the development, because we were working with the different teams that had different status of development as well.
Yeah. Where are you now and where do you want to go?
Yes, exactly. And then we used a template to represent like the pilot, representing what are the data sources.
Yeah, let's not go to the bureaucracies of things, like I don't need to know the details of the template. What I need to know is who were the stakeholders in this case.
So it depended on the pilots. So the question you just asked is actually the question we needed to ask to the pilots. Who are the users you're trying to interact with? So have you already had some interactions with them? Have you already worked with them? Do you know them quite well? Or is it the first time you're kind of trying to understand what they are doing? And also, do you need to interact with not only users, but also technical teams to develop the technical capacities, like the app or the IT infrastructure and everything?
So, and then how did you help all these people doing all these pilots? So as a designer specialized in co-design, how could you help them? First, you map the situation and you map the different stakeholders. And then?
And then we presented this vision that we had from a kind of external point of view to the persons the people in charge of developing the applications. And for them, it was very useful to see our questions and to see how we understood their applications from an external point of view. And then, thanks to our questions, they could maybe open up new ways of thinking that they didn't have alone. Especially in eShape, what we did was to say that there is not just one type of co-design. There are several types of co-design, which, depending on whether you are familiar with the users already, or if you're interacting with them, or...
Well, the co-design is a framework, right? So it implies a lot of different techniques and a lot of different methods, right? So you never use the same method because it depends a lot the context.
Exactly. And we need a phase to understand what is the context. And this was the aim of this first diagnosis phase, which is part of the co-design process.
So co-design has been a buzz term in many European proposals, and not necessarily has always been a professional designer being invited to take part. So what do you think is the advantage of having a professional designer involved in these projects?
Well, doing co-design in such situations is not self-evident because of this grand distance issue. And having someone taking care of the framing the co-design process helped the partners to better figure out what should they do, how they should implement co-design in their own activities. And I think we provided them with a new vision on co-design. As I said, co-design is not only a question of asking users to express their needs. Co-design requires a rigorous process of interacting with different kinds of stakeholders, and it involves a long-term learning process. And to organize this process, then it is quite useful to have experts in co-design. But actually, your question is also interesting in the sense that ideally, if we think about the future of co-design in the Earth observation community, an ideal case would be that progressively people from the research community of the Earth observation community would develop their own co-design capacities in a way. The idea is that within this project, we helped the project partners to do this co-design, and we experimented with them. But the idea was also that throughout this process, the partners would learn what co-design can mean and how they can implement it, and then they can continue without us in the future. But this is quite complicated, and there is probably a need of having a mix of routinized tools, but maybe there is also a need of having on-demand experts that can intervene in some more complicated cases.
And in relation to another project, you wrote that co-design between Earth observation data providers and unknown users. So how it is possible to co-design with unknown users?
Yeah, and this is the thing. We don't know who they are. And the co-design is a way of exploring who these unknown users are. So this is also why we find the co-design framework to show that in some cases you needed some kinds of exploratory types of co-design to see interesting people to interact with. I will maybe rephrase it a bit more clearly here, but usually we see co-design as, okay, we bring people together, some users that seem to be interested and are ready to take some time to discuss with us, and then we discuss with them what could be the different services and everything. But in some cases, you don't even know who are the relevant actors to interact with, or these users might not be ready to dedicate a lot of hours to work with you to develop this. So in that case, you might need another type of co-design where you have shorter meetings and workshops with larger spectrum of actors, and then you can so the idea here is to learn about the sector and to see the potential entry points in this sector. I can take an example if you want.
Yes.
So we worked with a research lab working on using satellite data to assess resources of wind energy, of offshore wind energy. And this research lab was interested in providing this data to the offshore wind energy sector. But then it was not very clear, so which actors in this sector would be the right ones to use these data. So in that case, rather than organizing a big workshop with lots of actors and everything, we organized very short meetings, 1 hour, 1 hour and a half, several of them with different people each time. So one with a big energy company, and 2 others with smaller actors doing some kind of technical consultancies, for example, to analyze the different sites where wind turbines could be installed, for example. And then it allowed the research lab to see with these different actors what could be the kind of relationship and collaboration that could be built. And then you can move forward to organize longer workshops with more extensive work on both sides.
So when you say that you have been creating a framework of co-design, the framework, I guess it has different elements or parts that the partners could use. Which are these parts or elements that you have been developing?
So the framework was consisted in giving a kind of structure about how a co-design process could be implemented in grand distance situations. As I've already said, there were 2 main parts in the process, a diagnosis phase and then the workshop phase. So a first aspect of the framework was to say, well, don't forget the diagnosis phase, which is also important to see the type of co-design you really need to implement. And then for the workshop phase, we also provided some guidelines. The issue actually in this situation is that it's very difficult sometimes to have long-term relationships with building long-term collaborations between these 2 worlds, because a user that might be interested at first then can disappear, or it appeared that, for example, a small startup was initially interested in knowing a bit more about Earth observation data, but then this startup was sold to a bigger group and then the priority was not the same. So then you have to adapt to the evolutions that occur in the field. So what is important for the workshops is always to have, at the end of the workshop, to see what could be, to build a kind of a portfolio of actions that could be carried out at different time horizons, rather than just saying, okay, let's focus on one list of requirements for one service. It's actually wiser to consider different options at different timescales.
So a roadmap you always do at the end of the workshop.
Yeah, it was represented as a graphic with different actions at different timelines. And the other reason for this is that sometimes it's not really clear yet if a service can be built out of this data. And sometimes you need first steps to better know each other, better learn from each other, and also develop the technical aspects, technical building blocks. I can take the example of the National Observatory of Athens, who was willing to develop a service related to the monitoring of the air pollution and the health impacts of air pollution for Greek cities. And in that case, it appeared that the monitoring system was, before developing the monitoring system, you first needed to carry out an analysis about the potential correlation between air pollution and health impacts. So in that case, you could represent on the roadmap that, okay, maybe we could think about a monitoring system, but this will be more for the midterm. But for the shorter term, in a short-term perspective, we first need to do some more research, and we might need some resources to do that. And then there is a second very important aspect of the workshop, which is to discuss about what kind of relationship we want to design. So co-design is not only about designing a product or an application. It's actually even more about designing a relationship. So what is the relationship that the National Observatory of Athens wants to build with the city of Athens, for example? And this needs to be very clear because, as I said, developing an application and exploring the potential value of data is something that takes a long time. So you need to make sure that the relationship will allow you to support these long-term learning processes.
But also always when you are designing a product or a service, an application, you are at the same time designing the collaboration within the stakeholders, you are designing the process, you are designing a lot of other things that are more intangible, right?
Exactly. And the thing is that it tends to be implicit. As I said, it's like intangible. And this is the problem. And this is why we need to transform the implicit into something more explicit and to explicitly discuss what is the collaboration we want to develop.
How do you describe the type of collaboration you want? Like really going into deep details and describing the roles?
That's a good question. I can give a few examples. For example, the research lab, the Danish research lab I was talking about, involved in developing services for the offshore wind industry. An example of the collaboration was to start to launch a master's project or a PhD project to work on a specific aspect, technical aspect that needed to be studied before thinking about a permanent service provision.
When you say a master project, is like to give a student the possibility to research on that, not a master program.
Oh, yeah, sorry, exactly. Yeah, it's like hire a master student to work on a specific aspect or a PhD student, depending on cases.
This episode is part of the list Infrastructures, Francia y Diseño Sostenible. The list can be found in our website, in Spotify, and in our YouTube page. And if you're looking for an episode and you don't find it, you can always contact me. Co-design requires interacting with different kinds of stakeholders in a long-term process, says Raphaelle. We invite them in different phases of the projects, from the conception of the first ideas, the testing of prototypes or pilots, and the evaluation of final results. There is an ongoing conversation that is sustained and fed by the object or service we are designing. For many design researchers, how to enact co-design is the main focus of their research. For many of the others involved, the focus is on the outcome, the services that are drafted or implemented as the result of the work. Research results from these two types of inquiries are often published in different forums and seldom talk to each other. But we talk in the making, in the transdisciplinary work, in the collective action. Let's continue listening to Raphaelle, that she has much more to tell us. What would you recommend a designer starting to work with environmental research infrastructures?
Maybe things that I have already talked about a bit, but I think we really need to maybe change our mindset about co-design. So co-design is not like just a process that you are doing at the beginning and then it's done once and for all. I think co-design is much more a continuous process. And the main idea of this process is to learn from each other. And in that case, we should remember that the researchers or the experts, the data providers, are not the only experts in this process. The potential users are also experts in their own field. And you need to make sure that data providers learn from the users, and not only users learning from data providers. There needs to be a kind of, a dialogue. And then, as I said, there is really this need of thinking about co-design as not only designing a product, but designing the collaboration. If you want to play on words a bit, you have this term co-design. So we also need to design the co, so designing the collective. I think this is a very important point. And also another aspect, which is related to data, I think there is a risk of what could be called data solutionism, meaning that data would provide all solutions to all our problems for climate crisis or biodiversity crisis and everything. And I think we really need to be aware that we shouldn't value data for their own sake. So data shouldn't be the ultimate goal, but data are more the way of creating some interactions between maybe people who don't know each other and everything. And maybe data would be useful, maybe not, but this needs to be discussed. And for sure, we should accept that maybe data are not like the panacea or the magic solutions to all our problems, I think.
Well, when you talk about data, in this case that you have been working with Earth observation data, you mean that these observations are not the only data, that we could also do different type of comparisons with data coming from the humanities.
This is true. This is one aspect. There is always a need of combining different sources of data. There is also this important point that maybe as data providers, the important thing is not to consider that data will necessarily be the solution and will be the panacea to tackle all sorts of challenges. But the idea is that as data providers, we can maybe offer new means to understanding the world and how to act, especially to tackle climate and biodiversity crisis. The idea is not to overlook the broader issue, the broader issues that need to be addressed.
Did you have pilots that were not related to data in eShape?
They were all related to data, but I think it's more like how the question is more how do we position ourselves as data providers? The idea is to have a kind of maybe open-minded attitude, saying that, okay, maybe I am thinking about one possible use case of this data, but I should not impose this use case. And maybe the users will be the ones also telling where data could be useful or not, and whether they're useful or not. I can also give an example, and that is there was a pilot working on estimating the solar energy potential on roofs at an urban scale, so for cities, for example. And first, this research lab had worked on a use case related to how this data could be used to help citizens to install PV panels, photovoltaic panels on their roofs. But actually talking with municipalities, the municipality also said, but maybe it's not going to be only used for PV installation, but it could be useful to purposes related to vegetation. And so in that case, as a data provider, the idea is not to impose the use case related to solar energy, but also to let the user speaks about the potential that they see in the data that can maybe go into certain directions that are different from the ones I was initially expecting.
Okay, but in this case, your idea is not to impose a use case. but the data was there as part of the question. Yes.
Yes. Data are always there.
Okay, so tell me, what would you recommend to read in relation to this type of research? What are you inspired by? What are you reading, listening?
Yeah, so for the recommendations about this aspect of techno-solutionism, I was trying to explain a bit. I would recommend the book by Ben Green, called The Smart Enough City. And yeah, this book depicts the risk that we can have to only consider things through the technical aspects or through the data aspects, and thinking that the data will be the only solution to all our problems. And this is really an invitation to look beyond data and to see, okay, really the holistic view of what's happening and where data can fit in, but not the other way around. And another book that is quite interesting, and this is something that I find quite inspiring, is actually to look back at history a bit. And there are a few books talking about how these big infrastructures, like the climate knowledge infrastructure, has been built over time. So this is a book called A Vast Machine by Paul N. Edwards. And another book looking at history is the one so-called Instrumentation Between Science, State and Industry by Jorges and Shin. And this one is quite interesting as well, because it's under the history of how generic instruments, like instruments that can be used in for many different applications, and been developed in the past. For example, in the 19th century for high precision mechanics and optics in Germany. It is quite interesting to see, and we can also see some echoes with what we're trying to do today with modern data and Earth observation data. And these books basically call for building sophisticated relationships between state, science, industry to build these generic instruments. So these are a few options.
Perfect. And where do you think your practice is going? We didn't talk about what are you doing now and where are you heading?
Yeah, or what I'm doing now. Well, this is a big question. To be honest, after the PhD, I needed to take a break, so I decided to go to the Arctic. But this is more a personal story. But I was actually interested in seeing the physical infrastructure behind satellite and everything. And in Svalbard, which is in the Arctic, I was able to manipulate a bit some instruments, and I also saw the antennas that are used to collect data coming from satellites. And this was my personal history. And what I find interesting as well, and this is another operation, is also the discussion I had with some artists who are working with scientists in this field. And as an inspiration, I find it very interesting to see how artists can also encourage us to reconsider our activities. And basically this artist, Lena van Goddeke, she was working with Earth observation scientists and trying to question how the data we produce also produce a certain vision of the world. And this is actually an important point to be aware.
So you envision yourself collaborating with artists?
Yeah, it's related to research. I think there are a few things as well. I mean, because there is this grand distance issue, it's not super easy to see like what kind of co-design methods we need and everything. And this is why we definitely need some research on co-design. And it's not only a question about consultancy or whatever. And I think there are still some research efforts needed for that. And my colleagues actually at the Center for Management Science at MIN Paris, BSA University, are currently working on another project funded by the European Space Agency to see how a co-design methodology could be built to related to the Destiny project. So it's to produce digital twins of the Earth. There is definitely so much search to be done here. And a final aspect I would like to mention, and this is also a kind of personal reflection I'm currently having, is like how co-design can also be quite critical in other contexts beyond the scope of Earth observation or environmental infrastructures. And I think this situation of bringing together and bridging the distance between people from very different expertise and everything is something that is quite critical in sustainability transitions. Not necessarily between data providers and users, but it can be between people from different sectors, citizens, policymakers, different industries, agriculture, energy. And I think there is, a lot of research needed to see how co-design can help to create new forms of collective actions to further progress towards these sustainability transitions.
Thank you a lot for your interview. In this series, we talk to different design researchers about how they engage with infrastructure in their work. For Sana, Kati, and Max, infrastructures are a way to think systematically during the design process. They see it as an opportunity to broaden the design space, moving beyond just physical objects. It helps them consider the practices, the context, and even the more than human elements involved in design. Raphaelle and Tatu have been working hands-on with environmental research infrastructures, and they share their experiences. Both have collaborated with policymakers to make environmental data more accessible and relevant to decision-making. Through these conversations, I wanted to explore how design and infrastructures intersect and bring together different perspectives on the topic. Connect with us through our social media channels and let us know how you found this series. What new questions has it sparked for you? As always, the music of this podcast is by Antonio Zimmerman. Sound design is by Julian Pereira. This podcast is published with Creative Commons license with attributions. This series is part of the work I do for the EU project IRISC, Integrated Research Infrastructure Services for Climate Change Risks. In this project, we will develop services using a co-design framework. This was Diseño y Diáspora. You can follow us on our social media channels, in YouTube, Instagram, or X or Twitter, or visit our website. Remember to recommend us and recommend our books. Till next time, goodbye, and design some more.